Hello, my name is Olivia Mattis, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program presented by the Sousa Mendes Foundation. We do have 4 guest speakers here today, one of whom will be a little bit late. That's Michael Berenbaum. He is speaking at a Zoom funeral, unfortunately, so he will join us as soon as he possibly can. But it is my pleasure in the meantime to welcome our 3 other guest speakers. We have Dr. Mordecai Paldiel, whom you know from our past programs. He's on our board of directors. He was the past director of the Righteous Among the Nations Department at Yad Vashem. We have the filmmaker of this very powerful award-winning film that you just saw, Roberta Grossman, and you'll be meeting her in a little while. And we have the Israeli singer Avaya, who's here to share what HANNAH SENESH means to her, and also to share her artistry with us and to read a poem for us. So it's a very, very special program, I think, that you're in store for. HANNAH SENESH is one of these figures that everyone should know. She's a historical figure who will be remembered for a long, long time. So let's start out with Mordecai Paldiel giving us some of the historical context and sort of laying the groundwork for the discussion to come. So Mordecai, how are you today?
Okay, I'm fine, thank you. I hope you've all seen the film, and I just want to repeat a few important data. HANNAH SENESH was born in Budapest into a relatively stable and family, was very well integrated in Hungarian life, assimilated. Later on, when she was denied a position in the educational department in Hungary because she was Jewish, she became more aware of a Jewish background. She became a Zionist, and then she decided she wants to go to Palestine, as it was then known, and help rebuild the country. She left in 1939. That's when the war started, towards the end of 39. And she joined a kibbutz, which was called Sdot Yam. It was just right next to Caesarea, the ancient Roman city of Caesarea. Her mother stayed behind. Her brother had left for France. Her father had already died. And she was able to be in touch with her mother with letters, sometimes direct letters, sometimes with the Red Cross. And she, of course, she wanted to get her mother out from Hungary because Hungary had allied itself with Nazi Germany. But very strangely, the Jews, most of the Jews in Hungary were relatively safe for many, many years of the war. In fact, until 1944, until March 1944, the Jews in Hungary were physically safe. We're talking about a Jewish population of 750,000. HANNAH SENESH in Palestine, in Israel, whatever you call it, decided that she wants to go back to Budapest for 2 reasons. First, she wants to see her mother and try to get her out, but the most important reason, she was now very ideologically committed, Zionist committed, and she wanted to try to do something to help out the Jewish people who were in Hungary. Now, this is Hungary, not yet under German control. Although Hungary is an ally of Nazi Germany, but there are no Germans inside Hungary. So that's a strange situation. At that time, a plan was devised by the Jewish Agency in Palestine and the British to send about 17 people to be parachuted into various parts of Europe, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Italy, and so forth, Slovakia, for a dual purpose. The British purpose was for these people to help British pilots who had been downed and they're trying to escape and trying to rejoin Britain to help them with escape routes. The Zionist purpose was for these people to help the Jews in organizing resistance and escape. Now, so they were trained by the British into military tactics. They were given radio transmitters. They were shown, they were trained into parachuting. And on March 15, 1944, that's the 50th year of the war, March 15, 1944, they were all parachuted, the 17 people. I have to say, it all ended in failure. All of these attempts. It was very poorly planned. Well, anyway, HANNAH SENESH and several others were dropped in Yugoslavia, in that region that was controlled by the partisans. There was a large partisan movement. She was dropped on March 15, and she was about to cross into Hungary when, lo and behold, 4 days later, the German army went into Hungary. And the Germans then became masters of Hungary, although the Hungarians, they were allowed to have a government, a collaborationist government. So the question is, when she was parachuted, the plan was to go into Hungary, which was not yet under German control. Now it's under German control. So she stayed in Yugoslavia from March 15 until June 6, that's 3 months, with the partisans. And then on June 6, she decided she's going to go ahead and cross into Hungary. When she was crossing into Hungary, the Germans and the Hungarians were already deporting tens of thousands of Jews every day to Auschwitz. The deportation was in full swing. We don't know how much HANNAH SENESH was aware of that. She crossed on June 6 and was immediately captured with a radio transmitter. So although she was dressed in a British uniform, supposedly she's a war prisoner, but the fact that she was born in Hungary, then she was considered to be a traitor. So she was arrested, and from June 6, 1944, until November 7, 1944, when she was executed, she was in jail, in a Hungarian jail. So a few days later, two of her fellow parachutists, Perez Goldstein and Yoav Palgi, also crossed the border, but they were not captured and they came to Budapest. Now, the instructions for all these three people was to look up a man by the name of Rudolf Kastner. Rudolf Kastner was one of the Zionist leaders in Hungary. He was involved in escape routes in Hungary for various people who had come there from Poland. And he was supposed to be the agent of the HAGANAH, the Jewish secret army in Palestine, in Hungary. But the question is, did he know that these three people were coming? Well, HANNAH SENESH is in jail, and the other two people appear at the door of Rudolf Kastner. And Rudolf Kastner is then, at the time, this is again, June 19, 1944, Kastner is organizing his train of 1,684 Jews. He made a deal with Eichmann, the SS leader who was sent to Hungary to round up the Jews. The deal was, you, Rudolf Kastner, you keep quiet. You don't tell the Jews what's in store for them in Auschwitz, and I will allow you to take 1,600 people out of the country to Switzerland. That's the deal that he made with Eichmann, which later on became a big, it's still being debated whether he was allowed to do this deal or not, okay? But he was afraid that if he was going to do anything to have HANNAH SENESH liberated, she was held by the Hungarians, not the Germans, then he would, the Germans would cancel the deal that he had with Eichmann about that train. And so I won't go into great details, but HANNAH SENESH remained in jail. Perez Goldstein and Yoav Palgi were turned over to the Gestapo, but Yoav Palgi managed to escape. Perez Goldstein was deported and he died. HANNAH SENESH remained in jail and was tortured. But the Hungarians, they brought in HANNAH SENESH's mother, Katharina, and she was shocked to see her daughter in jail because all she knew that HANNAH was still in Palestine. Well, the story is tragic because she was executed, and then the war ended. And then after the war came Israel, And in Israel, at that time, Israel had just won the war with the Arabs. And in Israel, the idea of the Jew as a Maccabean people, as a hero, a Jew who resists, a Jew who fights back, that is the type of Jew that they want to introduce in the education system. And that is the type of Jew that they want to hail. And so in Israel, famous Jews were David, who fought against Goliath, Bar Kokhba, who fought against the Romans, Joseph Trumpeldor, who fought against the Arabs up in 1920, and he died. And he was a one-handed man, but he died. And his last famous words were, "It is good to die for one's country." And that is repeated, and everybody studied that in Israel. As far as the Holocaust, you know, that's something that hangs on top like an albatross bird on top of many leaders in Israel. Did we do enough to save the Jews in Europe? So we have some heroes. We have the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. We have the partisans. And we have HANNAH SENESH. Here is a Zionist, a member of the kibbutz, goes to Palestine to build up the Jewish community, and then volunteers to go back into the lion's den to organize resistance and try to save. So she is the hero. So in 1949, the remains of Theodor Herzl were brought to Israel and buried in a mountain which was named after him. The following year, 1950, HANNAH SENESH's body was removed from Budapest and brought to Israel, and with a military procession, honor guards, and she was buried. She received a dignified and state burial at Mount Herzl, where Herzl is buried. And she then becomes the hero, the classical hero of the Holocaust. And then her songs, and then of course her poetry and everything are very much celebrated. And all of this was good in 1950. I just want to say 4 years later, a storm broke out because Mr. Kastner was then in Israel, and he was a government official, and Kateri and HANNAH SENESH's mother appeared during the trial of Kastner, and she accused him that he did make no effort to try to save her daughter. In fact, he refused to meet with her, and so she testified at the Kastner trial. But that's a whole different story. So HANNAH SENESH, a real hero from many angles, a poetess, a great person. She gave her life for the purpose of trying to do something for her people. And by actually flying into the area where she knew she was risking her life, and indeed she lost her life. That is in a nutshell the story of HANNAH SENESH, but there is more to be told about her.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paldiel. Let's now turn to the filmmaker, Roberta Grossman, who has made so many important films, the most recent of which is Who Shall Write Our History? Who Will Write Our History, I guess it is. And that's on a different topic, also very heroic. So Roberta, why don't you talk to us about why you made the film, and particularly I'm curious to know why you told it from the perspective, not of HANNAH particularly, but more so of her mother.
Well, I read HANNAH SENESH's, thank you for having me today, and thank you for honoring HANNAH SENESH. I read HANNAH SENESH's diary when I was in junior high, and I was very enamored with her. And I tried right out of college to make a film about HANNAH SENESH and wasn't able to pull it all together. And then many years later, after I had made several other films and television programs, historical television programs, I returned to the subject of HANNAH SENESH. And I was very glad that I did, that it didn't succeed the first time and that I had to wait several decades, because by the time I got to make the film on HANNAH SENESH, I had the experience and the resources to do it. I was a mother at that then, and I was closer in age to HANNAH's mother, Catherine, than to HANNAH at the time. And while in junior high, I admired the heroism of HANNAH. By the time I made the film, I really felt so moved by Catherine Senesh, who had to watch her very, very talented, strong-willed daughter leave Hungary for Palestine, was at a remove from her when the war started, And then, as Dr. Pauli said, was shocked to find out that although she thought her daughter was safe in Palestine, she actually was languishing in a Hungarian jail, and they spent several months together in a Hungarian prison together, able to see each other when they were walking in the yard, to communicate across the courtyard through their windows and that kind of thing. So I thought it ended up being a much more interesting film because Catherine had written a memoir about Hannah's life, her early life, her childhood, her Zionism, and about being in prison with her, and had also written about when Hannah's body was brought back to then Israel. And so I thought that made a very moving way to tell the story, was through the eyes of Hannah's mother.
Great. Wow. And so well, that process must have deepened your connection to the story. I mean, so did that change your feeling about her? You had maybe a certain feeling when you went in, and did that feeling change?
Well, I think that when you meet somebody versus when you've lived with them for many years, hopefully the feelings don't change as much as deepen. I was fortunate enough to work very, very closely with Eitan Senesh and his brother David, primarily with Eitan and with scholars who they had brought into their orbit to work on Hannah's papers and on her legacy. And I really worked very closely with Eitan Senesh. When I first went to Israel to begin the process, he showed me a room in his apartment in Haifa, a small room that was just full from floor to ceiling of the Hannah Senesh archives, in essence, photographs, her notebooks, her camera, her typewriter, family mementos of all kinds, posters from Hannah's father, who was a playwright and journalist in Hungary. And it was all just basically shoved into this little room. And he pulled out these shoe boxes that were filled with Hannah's photographs. And I think one of the most revealing things that I learned about Hannah, and one of the best things for a film, was that not only was she a poet and a diarist and a writer, but she was also a very good photographer and a very avid photographer. Actually, all the members of the Senesh family had cameras in the 20s and 30s. And so Hannah was recording her life, not only in words, but in photographs. So it was quite an amazing cache of images for a film. And I think that in terms to do a better job answering your question, I think that I always loved Hannah. I loved her more, but I've came to think of her as being very young, and that perhaps she might have made different choices were she older. As a matter of fact, my daughter, who was 8 at the time, my older daughter, who was 8 at the time that the film was just finishing up, I told her that under no circumstances was she to parachute behind enemy lines into Nazi-held Yugoslavia, and that if she did, that she would be punished for the rest of her life. So you can see the perspective that I came to look at Hannah. And I also think she was quite stubborn, and that she may have lived if she hadn't been so stubborn and so idealistic. That if she had just told the Hungarians as they were fleeing Hungary, as they knew the war was ending, what they had wanted to hear, perhaps her life would have been spared.
I think it's like this. She is, originally she was portrayed as a hero, the Maccabean hero. She's going out there to confront the Hungarian fascists. And then even though the Germans had invaded, she goes there, she wants to confront the Germans. So as Roberta says, she was a little bit stubborn, and she should have realized that she was no match for the Germans. And she didn't know that Kastner was then in intense negotiations about that train, and he wouldn't allow anything to happen to derail that thing. And had the Germans, the Hungarians, known that he was in any way involved with Hannah Senesh, because she was told to look him up when she left Palestine, then that train deal would have collapsed, it would have been derailed, and he was not willing to go to do that. So that added to the tragedy of Hannah, when she was interrogated brutally. I don't want to go into details here. She did not disclose who her compatriots who the other people were that were with her. And they wanted to know what is the code of the radio transmitter that she brought with them. Now, if she had given them the code, they would have sent misinformation to the British about various things. Now, this is, remember, June, when she crosses on June 6, 1944. Does anyone remember what happened on that same day? That's D-Day. That's the landing in Normandy. The Germans were frantic. The Allies had just landed in Normandy. So, of course, they were very anxious to know to get the code of the transmitter that she took with her, and she didn't say anything, and she suffered very much. The meeting with her mother in jail must have been horrific for her mother to see her in the condition after the torturous cross-examinations. So there are a lot of questions of whether the Jewish people in Budapest, I just want to say something historically. The deportations of Hungarian Jews stopped on July 7th. And from July 7th to October 15, there were no further deportations. So you got from July 7, 3 months where the Jews, now all the Jews in Hungary had already been deported except for 250,000 Jews in Budapest. And they were considered themselves safe. So at the time, the question is, how come the Jewish leaders that were still in Budapest, including Kastner, did not make any efforts with the Hungarian authorities to liberate HANNAH SENESH? On October 15, again, it was too late because then another more intensely pro-Nazi party took power. They are known as the Arrow Cross. And the Arrow Cross, with them, it was very hard to deal. And in fact, she was executed under the regime of the Arrow Cross a month, 3 weeks after they took power. So there was a lot of mysterious things about the story. And I would have something to say in addition at the end about honoring her.
Before we meet our next speaker, the singer Avaya, let's watch her perform one of Hannah's most famous poems called Walk to Caesarea in English and known in Hebrew as Eli, Eli.
There that was. I haven't, oops, something's wrong with my camera, it would appear. But yeah, can everybody hear me?
I just want to say, until the camera goes on, that song by HANNAH SENESH is the most known song in Israel. All school children know it by heart. It's repeated on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Day in Israel. Every year, this is the song that symbolizes the heroism of this woman and her optimism, you know, because it's basically a positive song about the spirit of man. And that is the song that is taught in all classes in Israel and is very popular and very well known. Eli, Eli.
So you will meet Avaya. She's coming to us from Israel. She was born in the US, grew up in the US until the age of 12, and then made Aliyah with her family and did all of her education in Hebrew, joined the Israeli army, and is fully in Israeli now. Avaya, are you here?
I'm indeed. Can you hear me and see me?
There you are. Wonderful.
Yay. I'm incredibly sorry for that technical difficulty, but we're back. Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Avaya. I am a singer and songwriter and producer, and I am currently living in Israel. I made Aliyah with my family 12 years ago, a very long time ago, and I've been here ever since. I created a cover, as you saw, for Eli Eli, which was a song that I always deeply connected to, but if I'm being completely honest, I didn't know the story behind the song when I covered it. I did not know the depths of the history that went behind it. I covered it because my mother absolutely loved the song, and I had just, my mother had just given birth to 2 baby boys, and she wanted me to make a lullaby for them. So I was making a lullaby for my brothers, and then I got just this unprecedented response, and a response that I did not expect from this cover at all. And people were in the comments telling me about, you know, their own connection to the song, their connection to HANNAH SENESH, their connection to the words and the history, and some of them with their own personal experiences, you know, and stories that were connected to this. And it was just, it was so overwhelming and beautiful. And I delved into the song and the meaning behind it much more, and just was completely blown away by the story of HANNAH SENESH. And I wanted to read the translated version of Eli Eli here. Well, it's from a poem. It was created into a musical version of the poem she wrote while she was living in the kibbutz near Caesarea. So I just wanted to read it out loud in English. My God, may it never end. The sand and the sea, the rustle of the water, the brilliance of the sky, the prayer of man. Which is just, the entire song is just a perfect depiction of hope and the hope for humankind, and just became, Eli Eli became one of the unofficial anthems of Yom HaShoah, of Holocaust Memorial Day, and of Israel in general. It was just such a moving song, and her story was so moving. So to me, HANNAH SENESH is just the embodiment of bravery, of complete selflessness, and it's a testament to what one human's actions can do to ripple history. Her story is a very sad one and ends very sadly, but she really does turn on a light in a very dark room in this story and history, which is just so special. Even though her story ends sadly, it's amazing what one person's actions can do to just completely change the fabric of our understanding of history, which is just absolutely beautiful.
And I just want to add to what Avaya said. The words are all positive. There was nothing there like never again and we got to fight tyranny and things like that. It's about the positive things about the human condition on a positive note. Tfilat ha'adam, the prayer of man, let it never end. And it's so positive and so uplifting. And it's recited on Yom HaShoah, which is the day that where we commemorate the worst thing that happened perhaps in human history. Yeah.
And one of the reasons that it is, to piggyback off of what you're saying, it's one of the reasons that it's just so meaningful. It's hope in the darkest of times. It's a song that depicts, as they said, the prayer of man, the just the hope for humankind, which is something really, really special, especially something special to it turns on a light during one of the saddest days of the year, one of the biggest tragedies. This poem depicts a sort of hope, which is so much more, I think, meaningful than simply sadness. Hope is something that rekindles fire in humankind. It's what we need to keep going. So this song meant so much more to me after the reaction that I got on YouTube when people were commenting. I had no idea. I was completely, I wouldn't say oblivious to the story, because I knew the basics. I understood kind of what the story, but I did not understand to like what the connection was between that and Hannah Senesh and her experience, and how it all brought it together. And people's reaction just completely opened my eyes to that. It was really incredible, and it was one of my more positive experiences in music, where music taught me something, and this song taught me so much. So I wanted to leave everyone with a quote that it's an untitled piece that Hannah Senesh wrote, which has really stayed with me, and it's another piece of hope. So I just want to read it here. There are stars whose radiance is visible on Earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for humankind. So that, for me, that's a quote that I saw, and it was just, to me, it's just another beautiful explanation, a beautiful example of hope, and how one person's actions can just really, really cause a massive ripple, even though they don't necessarily intend them. People have the ability to change the world, and even if that's not their intention, which is just really beautiful.
I just want to say, Avaya, that what you just read, I used to read that poem when I was at Yad Vashem, and we celebrated the righteous among the nations, the Gentiles will save Jews. I used to read that poem. I just want to add something, that while she was in jail, for the 6 months she was in jail and tortured, they ripped out her nails and everything, the other women that were in her section, and some of them survived, they survived. And then later on related that she was never bitter. She was always hopeful. She was good-natured, and she did not regret. The only thing she regretted is the pain that it was causing her mother, maybe. But she did not regret, and she didn't change in any way her opinion about man, about hope and future. She didn't become bitter. She was not like, with all due respect to Elie Wiesel, she was not like questioning human nature and so on. She remained positive until the very, very end. So she was an extraordinary person.
And for someone so young, she was 22 when she was, I just learned her age, and I'm 24, and I can't even begin to imagine the kind of bravery that it takes to do the things that she did, the kind of steel will, like iron will, that it takes to do that, to withstand such horrible atrocities and still come out the other side as what you describe as positive, which blows the mind.
I just want to add something more. When she decided to go to Palestine in 1939, the people in her circle of people who were assimilated, they thought she was mad. She was going to leave Budapest with all the cafes and restaurants and music to go and dig stones and clear swamps. The pictures that she used to send back home from the kibbutz, so they're standing deep in the sands with a shovel, and they thought that she went out of her mind. Later on, she realized that she was right. That she realized that there was no future for Jews in Hungary. That the tsunami, the storm was coming to Hungary. So later on, but at that time, that was also very courageous of her, that she decided to give everything up in Hungary, and go and become a pioneer in the kibbutz that today the kibbutz is a beautiful thing. There's a lot of greenery, but when she went there, that kibbutz was planted on a beach right next to the sea. There was only sand around her. So that too should be added when telling her story.
Okay, so I see that people are starting to put questions into the chat box, and I encourage you to add more questions. We'll get to your questions in, well, shortly. There is one question I would like to ask, to answer right away, which has to do with accessing the film after the program. Yes, the film will be available to you until February 9th. So you still have 10 days to see the film and see it multiple times as I've done. It's certainly worth spending the time to see that incredible film and this incredible story. Right now, let me tell you a little bit about upcoming programs. So next week, we are focusing on one particular family who was saved by the rescuer that we honor, Aristides de Souza Mendez. So we have the Stepel family that escaped from Dusseldorf. And we have a member of that family who's going to tell her family story. Basically, her mother died young without ever talking to Rebecca Barber, who's our speaker, about the family history. But Rebecca, after her mother died, found a diary. She found her mother's diary, which was all in German, and Rebecca doesn't speak German. So eventually she had the diary translated, and then her mother's entire exodus and her entire pre-war life came flooding into her consciousness, and sort of turned her life upside down, and she wanted to find answers. So it's a very touching story, and I encourage all of you to join us. It is a free program, although there's a fee for renting the film about Sousa Mendes if you wish to see that ahead of the program. The program itself is free. The following week, we are focusing on a very interesting story. It's going to be Valentine's Day, and the program is called Resistance of the Heart. This is a story of resistance that's not very well known. It took place in the heart of Berlin, and it had to do with intermarried couples where the husband was Jewish and the wife was not, although in many cases she would have converted to Judaism, but under the Nazi laws, she was still Aryan while the husband was still Jewish. So these were cases, hundreds of cases in 1943 where the husbands were arrested, and these non-Jewish wives managed to band together and to persuade the top echelon of the Nazi party to release their Jewish husbands, and they were successful. This was a resistance action that was successful, and it's quite a dramatic story. We have Mordechai Paldial, who will be joining us again for that. We have Nathan Stoltzfus, who's written a book on the subject. And we have Ruth Wiseman, whose family lived this story, and she'll tell you about her family and how they got through it. Then the following week, we are going to come back to the story of Hungary. We're going to focus on the very controversial George Soros, who has been much maligned, as you all know. It's a very interesting take on his life done by the filmmaker Jesse Dillon, who's the son of the singer Bob Dylan. So right now we're going to see the trailer for the film Soros.
What's it like to have a lot of money?
It gives you a degree of freedom. And it also gives you a degree of power.
Most Americans have no idea who George Soros is.
What a genius!
He is one of the most feared men in the world.
A Nazi collaborator, literally.
Spawn of Satan.
We all need to wake up.
One of those evil people in the world. There is this gap between perception and reality.
He was 13 years old when the Nazis came to Budapest.
We became targets during the crescendo of the Holocaust. 400,000 killed in a matter of weeks. That shaped my life. Instead of giving in, actually trying to prevail.
I chose the West because I sought freedom and to make money.
He made more than anybody else on Wall Street.
The act of making money made him miserable.
I asked myself, why am I doing it?
I did have fantasies of saving the world.
The philanthropy started gradually
communism,
gay rights,
education.
The more issues he became involved with, the more enemies he began to make.
He's become demonized because he's synonymous with liberal cause.
I have taken controversial positions to try to make the world a better place.
It's a battle of ideas at the most fundamental level.
In each person, there is a conscience that they need to activate.
Financial markets always move forward, and the same is true of history.
We need people to understand the power they have within them.
George always feels an individual can make a difference.
I'm willing to stake my life on that.
Great. So you will get an email after today's program giving you information about upcoming programs with links to register. And tonight is also the last day and night to get a season ticket if you are interested in having tickets to all of our programs, so that you won't have to register, you won't have to worry about deadlines. We will take care of all of it for you. So the deadline for season tickets is tonight. So let's now get to your questions. So here is the first question, and I don't know who wants to answer, but the question is, how is it that Hannah's mother escaped deportation?
One of the reasons why Hannah's mother escaped deportation is because she was in jail with Hannah. So in essence, even though Hannah's mission was a failure, and I think she went to Hungary in large part to save her mother, in fact, she did save her mother, because Hannah was arrested and they brought in her mother to try to convince her to spill the beans. Her mother was in prison while the deportations were going on.
I just want to add, HANNAH SENESH's mother lived in Budapest. The deportations in Hungary were not in Budapest until very late in 1944. All the deportations, which were in May, June, July, were in the provinces around Budapest. That's where all the Jews were sent, over 400,000 Jews, most of them to Auschwitz. When it came to Budapest, the Hungarian government stepped in and told the Germans to leave. And so nothing happened in Budapest until October 15th, when the Iron Cross took over. And as Roberta mentioned, she was also kept in Budapest, but she was trailed by the Hungarian secret police, who hoped that her meetings with Hannah will convince Hannah to be more cooperative and give more information, which it didn't work out. But then when the Iron Cross were there, and then there was that very infamous death march of over 50,000 Jews towards the border with Austria, and she was on that death march. She managed, and under that march, if you couldn't keep up with the march, you were shot. And a lot of people ended their lives on that march. She somehow succeeded to escape, to make her way out of the death march. How and exactly, I don't know, but she survived, because soon after the death march, about a month or two later, the Russians stepped in and liberated Hungary. So she luckily survived. And then after several years, in 1947, she moved to Israel, still then known as Palestine when she came there. But the following year, Israel became a state, and she remained there. So the reason why she was not deported was because the deportations had not yet taken place in Budapest for most of the year of 1944.
Next question is the small museum in Sede Boker about Hannah Senesh still open?
I don't know if moving everything to the National Archives, which has just happened in the last several weeks, is going to bring the emphasis on memorializing Hannah Senesh there, or if that small museum is going to remain open. I really don't know. It's been very underfunded for many years.
Next is, how did Hannah's brother manage to get back to Palestine from France that was occupied at that time? And the person adds, wonderful film.
He somehow managed to stay away from the Germans, and then he made his way illegally to Palestine because the British, they had closed Palestine off to Jews, except for a very, very small quota. And many Jews tried to make their way illegally. So he was one of them who succeeded in coming to Palestine in an illegal manner. Of course, he had no contacts with his, when he came to Palestine, it just so happened that he met his sister there. She, of course, had arrived earlier in 1939. He met her, you know when? In 1944, a day before she was off on a plane for her mission. So there is a picture of him and her standing together. That's the last photograph he has of her. That was on March 1944.
So Michael Berenbaum has just joined us. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
So tell us what you would like to say about HANNAH SENESH.
Well, let me first talk about the movie, which is that Roberta brought out in a very powerful way the story of HANNAH SENESH. And again, I ordinarily oppose reenactments, but Roberta did reenactments in the most powerful way imaginable, giving you just enough for you to imagine what was happening, expressing everything without language in a very powerful way. And she combines the combination of HANNAH SENESH, the person, with HANNAH SENESH, the symbol, with HANNAH SENESH, the poetess. And it's a very powerful mixture of the three elements of HANNAH SENESH, who has become, it's sort of the life and the afterlife of HANNAH SENESH, because she had a very strong afterlife and is central, and I know you've probably discussed this, is central to the way in which Israelis can grapple with the Holocaust itself.
There's a question in the chat box about the man that you interviewed, Roberta, who had parachuted with HANNAH, and he said he didn't like her, he admired her. So that's a bit of a confusing statement. What do you think he meant by that?
I think he meant that she was young and arrogant and stubborn and foolish. And even the decision to cross over into Hungary when the Germans had already invaded was a bad decision. And she was in effect disobeying the rules of the unit. So she was insubordinate. And I think that she was also, too outspoken for a young woman, and he didn't like that. Excuse me. She was not demure. So go ahead.
She also had a personal agenda in addition to the agenda of the unit.
Right.
And her personal agenda was clearly to save her mother. And that led her to take chances that a unit with their discipline would not necessarily have taken.
Right, because it could have, and perhaps even did, endanger the rest of the unit, right, Michael? I mean, she, like you said, because she had to get to her mother. There's no question about it. She could not wait another day. But that was not military discipline. And I think that even though Israel and Palestine was doing a good job of integrating women at the very early stages, there were still very specific gender roles that she was challenging. But I think, Michael, that the thing that you said is probably the most important.
Yeah, one question that I want to add. When she landed in Yugoslavia, it was March 15. On March 15, Hungary was still an independent country, although allied to Nazi Germany. There were no Germans there. When she was sent out on the mission, the idea was that she would penetrate into Hungary as still an independent country and try to get involved in a rescue operation and resistance. But 4 days later, after she landed, the Germans stepped in. And then HANNAH SENESH remained in Yugoslavia for 3 months, not knowing whether she should go ahead and penetrate into Hungary. Now the Germans are there. It's a whole new situation. And she is just one person against the German army. And for 3 months, she probably debated with herself. And she would probably, if she had asked her officers via the radio transmitter, they probably would have told her, stay where you are with the Yugoslav partisans. But after 3 months, on June 6th, then she crosses into Hungary herself with the radio transmitter and is immediately captured.
But
So,
let me also add what Mordechai you may have had before. The Holocaust in Hungary was a unique situation. The Germans invaded on March 19th. You had ghettoization in April and May, and beginning May 15th to July 8th, you had the transport of some 437,402 Jews, primarily to Birkenau. 147 trains during 54 days, 2,975 Jews an average a train, 2.7 trains a day. So when Mordechai says she's waiting 3 months, these are the absolutely most pivotal months in the history of the Holocaust in Hungary.
actually, yeah, that's right.
And by the time she gets in there, which is in early June, 50%, 70% of the people who were deported were already deported. And the only living Jewish community left is the community of Budapest.
So, Michael, the question is, when she was in Yugoslavia during those 3 months, was she aware? Did she know what was happening in Hungary? Did she know anything? Did she know that all the Jews in Hungary, except for those in Budapest, were being taken away on trains to Auschwitz?
Let's say what clearly I know she knew. She clearly knew of the German invasion of Hungary.
Of course.
She clearly knew of the German invasion of Hungary. She already knew of the fact that once the Germans invaded, they were capable of deporting populations to death camps. Whether she knew specifically of the deportations that was going on, the answer is probably she did not have specific information unless it came to her from British or Palestinian sources. And I presume when we speak of Palestinian sources, we're speaking of pre-state Israel, so I have no political agenda. I'm using a historical term at that point. So those of you who get upset with the term, that's the term historically that was there at that moment.
Let me ask you another question, Michael. When she went on that mission, she was told, when you get to Budapest, look up Dr. Rudolf Kastner, who represented the Jewish agency in the Haganah in Budapest. While she was in Yugoslavia, did she know that Rudolf Kastner was negotiating with Eichmann the train of the 1,684 people? And he didn't want this to be derailed by anyone coming in like HANNAH SENESH. Was she aware of that? She probably was not aware of the negotiations.
The less, remember, this is not so much a military operation as an intelligence operation.
That's right.
An intelligence operation always operates in cells. And the less you know about the total picture aside from your assignment, the better off you are, because if you're captured and tortured, you can't reveal what you do not know. So you know a limited number of people. You are aware of the overall situation in the Holocaust that is taking place. She becomes aware of the German invasion of Hungary, but she's not aware of another quasi-secret or medium-secret thing. She's certainly not aware of the mission of Hosni Brand and the like, which is the attempt to trade Jews for trucks and to see if there's a way of getting Jews out. She's not made aware of that. That's not her task. So you have in any intelligence information, the more compartmentalized your information, the better off you are, and the better off the intelligence operation is.
So we're almost at the end of the hour, and boy, this hour has been so enlightening and illuminating, and there's been so much information. So now I want to focus our speakers back to their final thoughts. And I want to start with Avaya and then turn to Michael Berenbaum then our filmmaker Roberta, and end with Mordecai Paldiel. So Avaya, what would you like to say to our audience?
I mean, my final thoughts, I think, on this. First of all, I thank you so much for having me. This has been so educational and just a really positive experience for me, just sitting and listening to all these incredible stories, seeing the trailer for that incredible looking movie. I'm very excited to go check that out. It looks like such a compelling film. And just to be a part of this panel is such an honor. Thank you so much for having me. That's number one. Number two is the thought that I think just has been repeated throughout this entire Zoom meeting has been that any human being, no matter who they are, no matter what background they're from or where they're from, any human being can make a difference, can create such a massive shift in everything without them even fully comprehending what kind of shift that will be when they're doing it. It's really incredible, the ability of mankind to change the world. So any human being, I guess that's my final thought, any person can make a difference.
Michael, what would you like to say to our audience?
I'm mindful of a comment that Walter Lacour made. Walter Lacour was both a great historian and a brilliant political scientist. And he said, when it came to rescue, the pessimists won and the optimists weren't given a hearing. Pessimists said nothing could be done and very little was done. And the optimists were kept being told that nothing could be done. What makes HANNAH SENESH so important, in addition to her human qualities, which were extraordinary, and her poetic touch, which again has an enduring quality because of the nature of her story and the nature of her work, but really what makes her significant is she tried. And she didn't give in to the pessimism that nothing could be done. And blessed be the people who try, even if they're told it can't be done, it couldn't be done, and maybe even it shouldn't be done. She tried to make a difference, and for that, I always salute her.
Roberta.
Well, I just want to thank Michael for giving me a different way of looking at Hannah, because as the years have gone on, I have despaired of what she did, and I love thinking of her as an optimist rather than as a somewhat foolish young person. So thank you for that, Michael, and thank you, Olivia, for putting this together and for making Blessed is the Match available to your audience.
Great. And Mordecai, I think you're going to break some news here today.
Well, no, not breaking political news. I'm not into that. But I just want to say, I worked for many years at Yad Vashem, honoring Gentiles who saved Jews. When it came to the question of honoring Jews who saved Jews, the position of Yad Vashem was a Jew who helps a Jew was simply doing what was expected of him or her to do. And so there is no need to talk about it. There's no need to acknowledge and honor and so on, because that's the responsibility of every Jew to help another Jew, which I found to be quite a ridiculous statement, but you can say that it was the responsibility of every person to help another person. So why do we honor the Gentiles? Why do we honor soldiers who, in an act of bravery, we can say, well, that's a soldier's duty to do that, and yet we give them medals. But anyway, this is still Yad Vashem's position. When I joined, while I was at Yad Vashem, I also became associated with another organization called the B'nai Brit. And the B'nai Brit in Israel has launched a program to honor Jewish rescuers of Jews. And I'm associated with the B'nai Brit organization in Israel. This morning, we had a board meeting of B'nai Brit, and I posed the question, if we were to submit the name of HANNAH SENESH as a Jewish rescuer, would that be accepted by B'nai Brit? After all, she did not succeed in saving. I also mentioned that at Yad Vashem, we honored Gentiles who tried to save or who were about to save. They got involved, but they never succeeded in accomplishing their deed, and yet we honor them with the Medal of Righteous Gentiles. So I posed that question, and the answer I got from most members on the board was that they would be in favor of declaring HANNAH SENESH as a Jewish rescuer, because she did go her mission. She did go there with the intention to save not only her mother, but to save other Jews. And of course, she did not succeed, but she gave her life for that purpose. So the answer was submit the application, submit the nomination. We will debate that. And my feeling is that this is such an extraordinary, unprecedented story that she will be honored as a Jewish rescuer by the B'nai Brit organization.
And I think you have a whole audience of 164 people who will gladly support the nomination of HANNAH SENESH for the title of Jewish Rescuer by the B'nai B'rith. So we certainly wish you the best of luck. And if anyone wants to write their letter of support, we can send it on to Mordechai, who can strengthen the case with.
Yeah, I just want to add, there's no question here about the story itself, about the evidence, about the credibility of the story. It's not like in other cases where there's a lack of evidence, we don't know where to go. Here, the story is known, it's crystal clear. So the road is more clear. The only thing that some people may say, she did not save anyone and so on, so maybe she doesn't belong in that category. But my impression was that most people at the B'nai B'rith in that committee, they are in favor of declaring her a Jewish rescuer.
So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks to our 4 speakers for giving of their time, their creativity, their expertise. And we hope to see you next time. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.